Okay, so let me put it like this. If I was a husband and my wife, she's giving birth in this scenario, she calls me up and says, okay, it's happening right now. Get over to the hospital. Your son, your daughter, whoever is being born and you don't want to miss it. If it was between that, a pretty important thing, versus watching the rest of this tutorial and hearing the monumental news that I'm about to unleash on your skull, quite frankly, it's going to crack it in two. It's going to be such a big deal. If it was between seeing the kid and watching this tutorial, 100% of the time, that kid's not getting the attention, right? I'm going to miss that birth because the news I'm about to talk about today really is a game changer. It is going to be geometry nodes. Basically, the idea that we've been messing around with Nodevember, we've been making procedural models using shader nodes, but now there's actually a dedicated geometry node branch of Blender that basically takes all the modifiers, a lot of the mesh commands, and turns it into something that is node-based. And we're going to talk about how that works in a second. But first of all, how do you install it and download it and use it? What you want to do is just go to the Blender website, click download, scroll all the way down, go to experimental. I know, fucking 1,000 clicks just to get here, but it's going to be worth it. Experimental branches, and then somewhere here, there's going to be, if I can't find it now, here it is, geometry nodes. You want to click this, download it. It's going to give you a zip, extract it, and open the Blender file, the Blend application, the executable, the thing that makes you open up Blender. Click that from there. And then once you've done all those steps, you're going to be over here, meaning that what you're seeing right now, you probably didn't even know this. This is 2.92 alpha, the geometry node branch. And if you go to edit, preferences, I know, so many steps. Experimental and enable new geometry nodes, that is all you need to do. Final thing, if you don't see experimental, interface, enable and disable developer extras, which is what's going to make this appear and disappear. And again, make sure geometry nodes is there. Okay, so now we can actually mess around with geometry nodes. We can actually do procedural modeling. Let me make it full screen. We can actually do procedural modeling. Of course, this is in development, but a bit of procedural modeling entirely in a dedicated version of Blender without any materials, without anything. Okay, so I'm excited. Once we set this up, you are going to see that we have a new editor type. It's called Geometry Node Editor. It's very similar to the simulation editor. If you were following everything nodes and like the particles and all that, this is the kind of project Blender is going to be working on for this year of making everything node-based, at least stuff like modeling, particles, etc. You're going to open up the Geometry Node Editor. We're going to make a node tree. Again, this works exactly like, in some sense, the material editor, the compositor. You make a tree, and then you mess with the nodes in between. However, there is one tiny caveat, at least for now. If you want your object to be affected by this node tree, so you can see we're going to affect the geometry input and do some stuff in between, send it to the output. Last thing you need to make sure is your modifier, or go to the modifiers rather, enable nodes. So this is going to be a new modifier type. And make sure that the node group, in other words, the tree that we're using, and in some sense it is a node group because we're going from input to output, so it's kind of like a member of our, full node tree. Either way, make sure that these match. So I'm just going to call this one tree, just so it's obvious, with 2 R's, whatever. Make sure these match, and now we are all set up. So how does this work? What we're going to do is we're going to take this geometry input. In other words, we're taking this cube, it's stored in this node. We are going to manipulate it, and then it's going to be outputted back onto here. So this is just a input, manipulate, output kind of cycle. So Shift A, just like any other node editor. Mesh, let's try something simple like transform. So far it's pretty intuitive. You connect geometry to geometry, on both sides. And as you might expect, we can now translate this using a node, which kind of symbolizes a modifier or a single operation. And already this node, I do not believe there's a transform modifier in here. So already there's more features in some sense. Congratulations, we did it. But in general, most of this stuff's pretty intuitive. So here we have a transform node that does all this stuff. Not very interesting. What can we do to, spice things up? What would we normally not be able to do so simply? Well, you see there aren't really too many options for what we can mess with, but you're going to see that in scattering, which is already an exciting thing, the idea of scattering objects on another object. We have point distribute, which is going to distribute points, so let's just connect that. You're not going to see anything because we're also going to need our point instance, okay? And already you're seeing what this does is it takes our input geometry again. You're going to need to start thinking node-based if you're not there. If you're just like thinking like a little dummy, thinking, oh, I need to hit edit mode and manipulate the vertices. Nah, dude, get rid of that like hard surface garbage that you learned, okay? Procedural forever. We start with a node. This is our cube. We feed it through point distribution, so it makes points on the surface. And now we're saying actually show us those points so that we can instance an object along them. In other words, We can now affect the density, and it will show us how many points. I mean, we can also have a minimum number of points. Nothing too confusing. To get an object instanced here, as far as I know, I think we should just be able to add in a second kind of instanced object. We then, shift-click this and parent it just like any other time. And I'm pretty sure we parent the sphere to the, instancer, so that when we go to this tab, what's it called? Cycles tab? Object properties. There we go. And you enable instancing for our cube to vertices. You can now see that it's using not necessarily the vertices of the geometry, right? Not like the 8 corners of the cube, but now it's using this new density thing. And you can do this for any arbitrary mesh, and it updates live. So, for example, if you wanted to scatter flowers and have each one be slightly different, so you could use the transform thing to change that or chain it, or maybe you want to, do a bunch of pebbles on a thing. All of this works, and I'm assuming these nodes are based on a algorithm that doesn't have the points intersect or at least be right over each other, although these two spheres are looking pretty close. One thing I would like to see is a seed slider. I feel like that's obvious, but anyways, again, the thought process behind this is pretty simple. Actually, let me bring these back. Cool thing about this is, again, since this is node group dependent, in other words, we have a tree that basically has a list of instructions. At any point, we could also add another object like a monkey. I'm going to put this over here. What's this called? A modifier, obviously. Add in the nodes, set it to the same thing, and now we've also have this set up over here. But, of course, we need to set the sphere to be a parent so it shows up. But point is, one tree can control multiple objects is the point, although it is looking a tiny bit glitchy so far. It's because it's under development. What other stuff do we have? We have Boolean, edge splits, some boring stuff. Subdivision surface is pretty cool. Pretty much all the math operations are ported in. I'm going to keep updating you guys on geometry nodes. God, that's so hard to say. It's not geometry nudes, geometry nodes. I'm going to keep you updated as they come out. However, for now, it's pretty rudimentary, but I think the reason they're developing it right now is there's going to be another Blender short film coming out. I think it's called Sprites, and they're developing it, this whole system for that. They're going to be scattering mushrooms and leaves and all kinds of stuff, and then also doing procedural modeling for tree bark and stuff like that. Point is, I think at this point, you know the very rudimentary basics of geometry nodes. You take geometry, connect it, do something, do it again. And once we have more nodes, we could do interesting stuff. Like with Boolean, you take two geometries and then you say intersect, union, whatever. Point is, the point is that you get it. There you go. Hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial. It exists now. Yeah, see ya. Oh, look at that. Is that a post-credit scene like the end of a Marvel movie? Kind of. I just wanted to say thank you to all the patrons that have been joining recently. Now we have over 520, 530 of you. I'm assuming it's because of all the November stuff, and there's all this crazy blend projects I'm putting up. Anyways, thank you to all the patrons who exist. Usually I put a little credit screen at the end of this, but I didn't really find it appropriate for this one because it was about a new feature, geometry nodes, and whatever. I didn't want to do that whole thing at the end. So anyways, I still want to give the thank you. It exists now. And yeah, now the video is over. See ya.